Greetings YouTube, this is Kudo. Hopefully this is going to be a pretty short video. I pretty much just want to talk about a new format coming out called Chaos is Magic for the MLP CCG. I don't really want to talk too much about it because I gave all of my opinions in a podcast that I was hoping to link in a video, but it's not uploaded yet. But when it gets uploaded, you'll be able to watch that and get all of my feedback on what I think of the new ban list and the new format, so on and so forth. This should also be a nice way to get some of you guys to go and check out the person who's uploading it, because the person who's uploading it does deserve a lot more subscribers than they have, and hopefully this will boost them up a little bit. But moving on from that, for people who don't know, I will say what Chaos is Magic is. Chaos is Magic is a new thing they're introducing into the MLP CCG, where every month there will be a new rule set that kind of changes up the way the game is played. The two rule sets they've given us already, the ones for February and March, are actually really big. February is you'll be able to play with two main characters, and March you'll be able to play troublemakers as friends. And honestly, those are just examples. The great thing about these formats is they bring cards that normally aren't good or aren't seen very much, and they bring them into kind of the competitive spotlight, because winning Chaos's Magic is considered just as legitimate as winning an actual match. And it's a little crazy because decks that normally wouldn't work in the actual game will work in Chaos's Magic, and vice versa. Decks will work really well in Chaos's Magic even though they don't work that well in the regular metagame, and metagame decks probably won't work as well in Chaos's Magic because the rules are different. Are we all on the same page? Good, enough of that. This is pretty much going to be a short list of ideas that I have for Chaos's Magic formats. I know somebody from Interplay does watch my videos because there's somebody I talk to who actually kind of talks back to me from Interplay, and we'll have to see if they actually watch this video. If they do, great. If they don't, then whatever. But these are just some of my fun ideas for what a Chaos's Magic format could be like. Spooktacular. This would pretty much be something that you would play around Halloween. It's pretty much just a way to give Frightened some real kicks so that people play Frightened decks and see which person can out-Frighten the opponent. When a friend is frightened, it doesn't just turn her over so that you can pay 2 and turn it back to its original side, it goes back to the deck. Originally I was going to say it should go to the discard pile, but I feel like that's a little bit too harsh. I think if it goes back to the deck, you have another chance of drawing it again, and it's not that bad. But still potent enough that your opponent will try to do it. Also, main characters can be frightened under these rules. They're sent home regardless of whether they're boosted or not, and if they are boosted, they return to their start side. I also made it so that when players frighten a friend or a main, they gain 1 victory point, so that frightening your opponent's friends doesn't mess up the game too much. It doesn't make the game last too long, and it still sticks to the idea of who can out-frighten the opponent. Following holiday themes, Holiday Cheer would be a December format, where players can choose to gain 2 action points if they need the 2 action points, and in return their opponent gets to draw 1 card. It's sort of a sharing, everybody wins kind of rule to, you know, kind of get into the spirit of Christmas. I also made it once per turn because if I don't make it once per turn, people are going to abuse this to get just infinity action points, or they're going to force their opponent to draw out of their deck. So I made it once per turn. I think it's pretty balanced. Getting off of holiday themes, No Pony Left Behind would pretty much make closer matches. The losing player gets the benefit of getting either 1 extra action point at the beginning of their turns, or getting to draw 1 extra card at the beginning of their turns, and if they're losing by 6 or more, then they get to do it twice, so either draw 2 cards, gain 2 action points, or draw 1 card and gain 1 action point. This should make control decks a little more interesting, because if your opponent is playing something that just gains victory points super quickly, then you benefit from it by getting more action points or getting to draw more cards, and it should just be interesting, especially because the person who's losing still has a chance to come back, making the match a little bit closer. Slow and Steady incorporates an idea that I've actually always had for the MLP card game anyway, and that's a cap on the amount of action points a player can have at once. Players start at a cap of 4, and it increases by 2 for every 5 victory points the winning player has, just like the amount of action points you gain during the beginning of your turn. So it starts at 4, and then at 5 it goes to 6, and then at 10 it goes to 8. At 15 I don't need to place one because obviously somebody's won by that point. This would probably create a lot more use for low-cost ponies, and it would make cards like Octavia and some of the other kind of broken cards more valuable for mid-game to late game, and you can't just drop them immediately at the beginning of the game and lock your opponent out. It would also be interesting to see what players do to stop some of their action points from going to waste, or if they would just willingly stop gaining action points for consistency. Dishonored is pretty self-explanatory. Friends have 0 color requirements, ever. This would probably be a pretty fast-paced format because cards that normally nobody plays because they have such a high color requirement, like 4 or 5, could be played pretty much at any time, like Gyros with Skyrocket in purple decks. The name might need to be changed upon further inspection. Some people are going to worry that something like this would make it so that pretty much everybody was just playing the exact same deck because they would just pick all the best cards and make a deck out of that using all 6 colors. But keep in mind that problems would still have the color requirement, so you'd still have to build around your main and your problems. So it's just you can play cards that you normally wouldn't because they have too high of a color requirement. Oh my god, this one's really wordy. Okay, pretty much to sum it up, this is an idea that I have for 2v2s instead of 1v1s. Going into something like this, I know people are going to go through and try to nitpick a bunch of different problems or try to come up with different scenarios, but honestly, I think this is as close to fair 2v2 rules as we're gonna get, at least until some people do some testing. You and your teammate have different main characters that play at the same home, you both have different decks that you each draw from, and you share one pool of action points. One of the main differences is you and your opponent can work together to create a 10-card problem deck instead of each of you having your own. That way there's still only 2 problems in play, and a lot of the card game's rules don't get broken. If an effect would target a player, then you choose which player the effect will apply to. If it says your opponent, then you choose which of your opponents it applies to, and if it says you, then you can choose to apply that effect to your teammate instead. The example I give here is Let's Get This Party Started, which lets you draw 3 cards. Well, if you play this card, then instead you can have your teammate draw the 3 cards, but you can't split it between you. If you really care about playing 2v2s, I'll let you go over it yourself, but I've got some other stuff to get through and I don't want this to go on for too long, so I'll leave it there for right now. You can pretty much figure out the rest on your own anyway. Discord's artwork would give better emphasis to troublemakers because there wouldn't be a limit to the amount of troublemakers can be face up on a problem. There are some nitpicky balance rules saying that you could throw out here, but I'm also saying, I forgot to type it out here, but you guys can figure it out by just listening to this, that there is a unique rule for problems. So, like, let's say you play a yellow Parasprite, you can't just stack 3 yellow Parasprites on the same problem. You can only have 1 yellow Parasprite on each problem as regular. A place for everything is kind of one of my favorites. Pretty much if a card would be sent to the discard pile for any reason, including using it, like if you play an event or something, then it goes to your deck instead of the discard pile. Also, if your opponent's playing like a pink deck or something and your friends keep getting discarded, then they go to the deck. Some people would play this and probably look for little ways that like, oh look, I did this little neat trick and it was super cute, and now this card goes to the discard pile and gets around the rules, which wouldn't actually happen, because if a card would go to the discard pile for literally any reason, it's sent to the deck instead. This would make events a lot more powerful, and I'm just really interested to see where something like this would go. It's especially neato for decks that are still using like color fixer events, because the cards would go back into the deck and you would draw them and they would be dead draws later in the game, so there's kind of that little balancer there, and I want to see what happens. Some people are going to argue that this makes cards that deal with the discard pointless. I know, that's kind of the point. Well, what are you even talking about right now? You just wouldn't run those cards. The entire point of this is to make decks that go with the style of play that is introduced with the rule set. Okay, Repercussion is probably a rule set that could never actually work, but I thought it was kind of an interesting idea, so I thought I'd share it anyway. The idea of the rule set is, let's say your opponent wins like 4 victory points. You can search their deck for 4 cards and put them into the discard pile. Some people are going to say this is a really broken rule, and it very well might be. But if your opponent is playing a deck that just gathers victory points at a super high rate, then all of a sudden you have some kind of way to slow them down and you can catch up. It's just a really interesting give and take, where the more victory points you get, the less good cards you have left in your deck, and you have to work around it by playing some of the kind of lesser important cards in your deck, pretty much. or just not winning any victory points until you get the cards that you want to use out of your deck, and your opponent has a chance to just come in and get victory points in the place. It'll just be an interesting thing to see. Study Session would just make the rule that you can pay 1 action point during your main phase to draw 1 card a little more powerful, because when you do it this time, you can look at the top 3 cards of your deck, put one of those cards in your hand, and put the rest on the bottom. So it lets you control which card you draw. Not much to say about this one. It would just be interesting to see if people use the pay 1 to draw 1 rule a little bit more if you give them the option of looking at the top 3 cards and putting the most beneficial one in their hand. Prismatic is probably the most complicated rule that I made, but I'm gonna explain it. It's really not as complicated as it looks. Also, if you couldn't already tell, this rule set was inspired by the Prismatic cards that came out in the 3rd set. So when you're playing with your opponent, you have a deck of 6 cards. This affects both you and your opponent. You don't have 2 separate decks, and it doesn't matter what cards are in the deck as long as there's 1 card of each color. At the beginning of your turn, the top card of the deck is flipped, and every single in-play card gains that color. So if you flip like an orange card on top of the Prismatic deck, then every in-play card can also count for orange. This should create some surprise turns, because like let's say you're using a blue-orange deck and you use a blue main, but your deck also has orange in it, then there's a chance that while that card is flipped, you can play some orange friends a lot earlier. But here's the twist. When a card is on top of the Prismatic deck, if a character already has that color, then they actually lose that color instead. So let's say you're using like an orange main and an orange card is on top of the Prismatic deck. Then because your card is orange, it actually loses orange until a new card is flipped. Hey, the format is called Chaos is Magic, and I'm telling you, the chaotic nonsense that would happen because of this rule would be pretty effing magical. This video is way too long already, so this is the last one I'm going to talk about. It's called the Pinkie Pie Surprise Party. At the end of each player's turn, they put their hands on the bottom of their decks in any order, and they draw 5 cards. It sounds simple, but it changes a lot. First of all, if you're saving up because you have a really sick combo in your hands, it's not going to work, because at the end of your turn you're going to have to put all of those cards on the bottom of your deck. So you can play some pieces of it now, but a lot of higher level players don't do that, because if you can't pull off the full combo and achieve something, you don't want to just start throwing crap out there. But with this rule you'd kind of have to, or you'd risk just not being able to use it until the end of the game. This also allows you to stack your deck, because if you remember the order of some of the cards that you put on the bottom of your deck, then you can kind of like draw into them and go, oh wait a second, if the next card I draw is this, then it's in this order and I'm starting to hit the cards that I stacked on the bottom of my deck. Cards that made you shuffle your opponent's deck would also be a lot more prevalent, because if it hit late game and they started remembering what cards they put on the bottom of their deck, that could be problematic. So you could play cards to make them shuffle, and all of a sudden they don't know anymore. I don't know, it all just sounds like a good time to me. It also rewards players for being able to play out their entire hand in one turn by just getting to draw a fresh hand of 5 cards. So that's about it. If you thought any of this was interesting, then please leave me a like. Those things really do help me out. When the podcast goes up, I'll give you guys a link so you can check that out. If you don't know anything about the Chaos is Magic rules, then please do a Google search and look it up, because it is going to be pretty amazing. And I really want to know what your guys' thoughts on this are in the comment section below. Please make up some awesome Chaos is Magic rule sets and share them with everybody. Who knows, maybe a few could be picked up by Interplay and we could see them for real. And finally, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to stay up to date on the latest Kudo news. I'll see every pony on the playing field.